Little girl interrupts the billionaire's speech, and what she reveals leaves everyone speechless. The Metropolitan Theatre was packed. 2,000 people filled every seat in the majestic auditorium, and at least a dozen television cameras were focused on the main stage, where Richard Hale spoke with the authority of someone who had built an empire from scratch. At 42, he was the kind of man who commanded attention just by entering a room. Tall, elegant, with that confident smile that graced the covers of major business magazines. "Ethics in business is not optional," he said, gesturing confidently as he walked across the stage. "It's what separates real entrepreneurs from opportunists. When you build something lasting, you need to look in the mirror every morning and like what you see." The audience hung on his every word. Richard Hale wasn't just rich, he was respected. His companies generated thousands of jobs in 12 countries. His foundations funded children's hospitals and schools, and he always appeared on lists of the continent's most influential philanthropists. "Social responsibility begins with personal responsibility," he continued, his deep voice echoing through the speakers. "Therefore, we can't talk about humanity in business if we aren't human in our own lives." It was at that moment that she appeared, a small girl, perhaps 5 years old, with light blonde hair that bounced as she walked determinedly down the center aisle. She wore a simple, slightly wrinkled blue dress and black shoes that made a soft tapping sound against the red carpet. The security guards hesitated. She was just a child, after all. How had she gotten past security? Why was she there alone? But before they could react, the girl had already reached the steps leading to the stage. Richard kept talking, but his attention shifted to the unusual movement in the audience. The girl was climbing the side steps of the stage with a confidence that didn't match her age. "Sir," she called out, her childlike voice cutting through the sound of Richard's microphone. The entire auditorium turned. The rustle of 2,000 people shifting in their seats created a strange echo. The cameras immediately focused on the child. Richard stopped mid-sentence, frowning. "What is it, honey?" he asked, trying to maintain a friendly tone. "Are you lost? Where's your mommy?" The girl planted herself right in front of him, just a few feet away. Her light blue eyes stared at him with a disturbing intensity. For a second that felt like an eternity. She just watched him, as if confirming something very important. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. 2,000 people held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. "You abandoned my pregnant mother," she said, her voice sounding loud and clear in the silence. The impact was instantaneous. The flash of cameras increased dramatically, creating a light show that made the scene even more surreal. Journalists shifted restlessly in their seats. Some were already typing on their phones. Richard felt as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on him. His first instinct was to deny it, but the words wouldn't come out. He just stared at the small child, who had just made a devastating accusation in front of the world. The girl wasn't finished. "She cries every night." The words echoed through the auditorium like a shout. The murmurs in the audience grew into a deafening buzz. People leaned toward each other, whispering theories and speculations. "This can't be true," Richard muttered, more to himself than to the girl. But as he spoke, he couldn't look away from those light blue eyes. There was something in them that left him completely breathless. A familiarity that didn't make sense, a connection he didn't want to acknowledge. The child didn't seem intimidated by his denial. She continued to look at him with that expression that was too serious for her age. "I saw you on television, and I recognized you," the girl said, her voice now softer, but still perfectly captured by the microphone. "You have the same eyes as me." Richard finally regained his composure. His voice came out stronger, more controlled. "Shah, this is clearly a setup to tarnish my image," he declared, looking directly at the cameras. "Someone is using an innocent child to create a baseless scandal." But the girl didn't seem the least bit intimidated. "Nobody sent me," she said, shaking her head with conviction. "I saw you on television last night and I felt that you were my daddy." Richard's heart was racing. Those blue eyes, the delicate shape of her face, even the way she tilted her head when she spoke. It was all disturbing in a way he couldn't explain. "How did you get here?" he asked, genuinely curious despite the shock. "I took the bus," Emily answered simply. "I asked the lady at the bus stop where this theatre was." The idea of a 5-year-old navigating the city alone to get there left everyone even more shocked. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "You came alone. Does your mother know where you are?" Emily shook her head. She was sleeping. "I left a note saying I was going to talk to the daddy from TV." The word daddy echoed through the auditorium like a bomb. People could no longer contain themselves. They were talking openly, pointing, recording with their phones. Richard tried to keep control of the situation. "Look, honey, you're confused. I don't know your mother. I've never seen her in my life." Emily watched him with that unsettling seriousness. "But I feel that you're my daddy," she said simply. "I have the same eyes as you." The question she asked next cut through the air like a blade. "Why did you never come to see us?" Richard felt 2,000 pairs of eyes on him, waiting for an answer to an accusation he was sure was false. Because I don't know who you are," he said, his voice firm again. "You're a confused child who shouldn't be here alone." Emily didn't seem hurt by the denial, just sad. "I'm not confused," she said, her voice small but perfectly audible. "I know you're my daddy. I feel it in here." She touched her small chest with her hand. The words were simple but loaded with a childlike conviction that hit Richard unexpectedly. Before he could answer, the security guards finally acted, approaching the girl carefully. Emily looked at them, then at Richard one last time. "I know you're my daddy," she said with absolute certainty. "And one day you'll know it too." And then she ran off, down from the stage with the same determination she had shown coming up, disappearing among the people in the auditorium before anyone could stop her. Richard was left alone on the stage, with 2,000 gazes fixed on him and millions of people watching on television. The silence was deafening. He looked at the audience and then at the cameras, and for the first time in decades, Richard Hale was speechless. I need to end it here for today," he finally said, leaving the stage with quick steps. Backstage, he leaned against the wall, his breathing heavy and uneven. His mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. How did a 5-year-old girl have the courage to do that? How did she know where to find him? His assistant, Margaret, appeared at his side, her cell phone ringing incessantly. "Mr. Hale, we need an urgent communications strategy. The press is in a frenzy, and the video is already spreading all over the internet." But Richard was barely listening. He was thinking about those light blue eyes, the confidence with which the girl had spoken, the unsettling familiarity of her features. In the auditorium, no one had left. Everyone was whispering, speculating, recording. What had started as an event on business ethics had turned into the biggest scandal any of them had ever witnessed. The cameras continued to record every reaction, every shocked look, every whispered theory in the audience. And somewhere in the city, a woman was arriving home from her night shift to discover that her 5-year-old daughter was missing, leaving only a poorly written note. "Went to talk to Daddy on TV. Be back soon." Richard remained backstage, looking at his own trembling hands, trying to find a logical explanation for what had happened. But for the first time in his controlled and planned life, Richard Hale felt that something was completely out of his control, and those light blue eyes wouldn't leave his memory, disturbing him in a way he couldn't explain or forget. A small seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how much he tried to deny it, it was there growing silently in his mind. Richard stayed up all night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those light blue eyes looking at him with a conviction that disturbed him. The event had ended 12 hours ago, but he could still hear the girl's voice echoing in his mind. At 5:30 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep and headed to the office. The city was still quiet, but Richard knew that as soon as the sun rose, his life would become a living hell. The video of the confrontation was already all over social media. At 6 o'clock sharp, he called Margaret. "I need you to put together an investigation team," he said without preamble. "I want to know everything about that girl. Full name, address, school, especially about the mother, everything." "I'm already on it, Mr. Hale. Our legal team is also preparing a strategy to deal with the press." "I don't want strategies," he interrupted. "I want facts." "I want information." Margaret hesitated on the other end of the line. She had worked for Richard for 8 years and had never heard him sound so vulnerable. "Sir, may I ask, is there any real possibility that the girl's accusation is true?" Richard was silent for a long moment. It was the question he had been avoiding since he left the stage. "Shall I just find the information on them?" he finally said. 3 hours later, Margaret was in his office with a thick folder in her hands and a cautious expression on her face. "The girl's name is Emily Jensen," she began, opening the folder. 5 years old, born in March. Lives with her mother, Clara Jensen, in a small apartment in the industrial district. Richard felt his stomach drop when he heard the name. Clara Jensen. Memories he had buried 6 years ago came back like an avalanche. "Clara Jensen," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the name. "Do you know her, sir?" Richard got up from his chair and walked to the office window, looking out at the city stretching below. "I did. A long time ago." Margaret continued reading from the report. "Clara works as a waitress at Murphy's Diner during the day. At night, she works at a 24-hour diner. 2 jobs and 6 days a week." Richard closed his eyes. Clara had always been a hard worker, dedicated. When they met, she was finishing her degree in education, dreaming of becoming a teacher. "Their financial situation seems to be challenging," Margaret continued diplomatically. "The apartment is in an old building, low rent. Emily attends a public school in the neighborhood." "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Yes. And this is important." Margaret consulted her papers. "There's no father listed on Emily's birth certificate. The child was registered with only the mother's name." Richard felt like he had been punched in the gut. "There's one more thing, sir," Margaret hesitated. "I checked the child's medical records. Emily was born exactly 8 months and 3 weeks after the date you ended your relationship with Clara Jensen." The silence in the office was deafening. Richard could hear the ticking of the clock, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant noise of traffic. "Get the car ready," he said suddenly. "I'm going to visit them. Sir, are you sure that's a good idea?" "Perhaps we should consult the lawyers first." "Margaret," Richard said, and there was something in his voice that made her stop immediately. "Get the car ready." The drive to the industrial district took 40 minutes in the morning traffic. Richard watched out the window as the landscape gradually changed. The mirrored skyscrapers gave way to older buildings, worn-out signs, and cracked sidewalks. The apartment was in a 3-story building with peeling paint on the exterior walls and an iron staircase that creaked with every step. Richard climbed slowly, each step increasing his anxiety. It had been 6 years since he'd seen Clara. 6 years since everything had fallen apart between them. He stopped in front of apartment door 2B and took a deep breath before knocking. The door opened after a few seconds, and there she was, Clara Jensen. She was 28 now, but she looked older. Her face was still beautiful, the same expressive brown eyes, the same mouth he used to kiss, but there were lines of exhaustion around her eyes. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she was wearing the yellow and brown uniform from Murphy's Diner. "Richard," she said finally, her voice calm but with a coldness he had never heard before. "Clara, may I come in?" She hesitated, then silently stepped away from the door. "Emily's at school," she said, as if anticipating his question. Richard entered the small apartment and immediately noticed the difference between this space and his penthouse. The apartment was clean and organized. Clara had always been meticulous but clearly simple. The sofa was worn but covered with a colorful blanket. The dining table had scratches and marks from years of use. The curtains were patched in a few places, and he could see the furniture was second-hand. On the wall, there were children's drawings. Flowers, houses, figures that looked like a woman and a girl holding hands. No father figure anywhere. "Do you want some coffee?" Clara asked, but her tone was formal, distant. "Please." She went to the small kitchen, and Richard followed her. The space was tight but functional. He watched as she moved efficiently around the room, preparing coffee in an old coffee maker. Her hands seemed rougher now, with small cuts, probably from her work at the diner. How did you find me?" she asked without looking at him. "My team investigated after what happened yesterday." Clara nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Of course. The powerful Richard Hale has a team for everything." There was bitterness in her voice, and Richard felt a pang of guilt. "Clara, about what happened yesterday at the theater." "Emily ran away," she interrupted, finally turning to face him. "When I got home from work at 2 in the morning and saw her note, I nearly died of despair. A 5-year-old child alone in the city. She said she saw me on television." "Yes." Clara turned on the coffee maker and leaned against the counter. "Emily has a habit of watching the news with me while we have dinner. Yesterday, when your speech was on, she stopped eating and just stared at the screen." Richard felt his heart race. "What did she say?" "She said, 'Mommy, that man has the exact same eyes as me. Do you think he's my daddy?'" The words hit Richard like punches. He leaned against the wall. "Shaz, and what did you say?" Clara studied him for a long moment. "I told her it was a coincidence, that a lot of people have blue eyes, but she didn't believe it. Emily is very smart, Richard, and very determined, traits that she inherited from someone." The irony in her voice was clear. The coffee maker beeped, and Clara poured the coffee into 2 simple mugs. They sat at the small table, and Richard watched Clara discreetly. She was different, more serious, more tired, but also stronger. There was a resolve in her shoulders that wasn't there before. "She asked me a lot of questions about her father last night," Clara continued. "It wasn't the first time. She's curious about these things." "And what have you always told her?" "That her father had left before she was born, that sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people." They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee. Richard noticed that Clara still took her coffee the same way. No sugar, just a drop of milk. Small details his mind had kept. "Or why did you never contact me?" he finally asked. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Clara put her mug down on the table with force. "Contact you?" she repeated, and for the first time, her voice showed real emotion. Anger. Hurt. "After what happened?" "Clara, I can explain what happened that night." "Explain what, Richard?" she interrupted, getting up from her chair. "Explain how you were in bed with your secretary a week before our wedding. Explain how you made me believe you loved me while you were betraying our relationship." Richard felt the weight of her words. The memory of that terrible night came back with force. The bachelor party that had gotten out of control, the alcohol, the secretary who always flirted with him, the stupid decision that had destroyed everything. It wasn't what it looked like. "It wasn't what it looked like," Clara laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was a bitter laugh. "I saw you, Richard. I saw you with my own eyes, in your own bed. I was drunk. It was a terrible mistake." "A mistake," she repeated. "Of course. It was always easy for you to dismiss things as mistakes." Richard stood up too, trying to get closer to her, but Clara took a step back. "You don't understand," he said. "I loved you, Clara." "No," she interrupted firmly. "Don't say that." "But it's true." Clara faced him with eyes shimmering with tears. "Then explain something to me, Richard. Explain how someone betrays the person they love a week before the wedding. Explain how someone who loves doesn't chase after them, doesn't fight." Richard had no answer for that. "Because I didn't trust you anymore after the cheating," Clara continued, her voice growing steadier. "You put on a show of being a good man, but you were a hypocrite." The words hurt more than Richard expected, because he knew they were true. Back then, he had been a coward, immature, unable to handle the pressure. Clara, please. No, Richard. You made your choice back then. You chose your career, your reputation, your easy life, and I chose to protect my daughter from a father who didn't know what he wanted. I didn't know about Emily, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Clara stopped and looked at him for a long moment. I found out I was pregnant a week after we broke up, she said. A week after I found you with that woman. Richard felt as if the floor was crumbling beneath him. Why didn't you tell me? Clara faced him with a mixture of anger and pain in her eyes. Because I didn't want my daughter to grow up thinking she had a father who didn't really want her. Because I didn't trust that you would stay. You should have given me a chance. A chance? Clara shook her head. Richard, you cheated on me a week before our wedding. What kind of chance should I have given you? Richard had no answer for that. He knew she was right. Knew he had been cowardly and selfish. If you want, get a DNA test, Clara said suddenly, her voice returning to that calm, cold tone. But you already know the truth. Emily has your eyes. Richard looked at her and saw something that scared him. Resignation. Clara wasn't fighting anymore, wasn't trying to convince him of anything, just stating facts. I'll get the test, he said. Not to prove anything to you, for myself. Clara nodded. As you wish. But when the result comes back and you know she's your daughter, don't think you can just show up in our lives and fix everything. Emily isn't a charity project, Richard. I know that. Do you? Because your first reaction yesterday was to deny everything publicly. It was to call my daughter a liar in front of the whole world. Richard closed his eyes, remembering how he had reacted on stage. I was in shock. Emily was hurt too. She really thought you would recognize her, that you would be happy to see her. The guilt hit Richard like a hammer. How can I fix this? I don't know if you can, Clara said simply, and there was an honesty in her answer. But if you're going to try, you need to be sure this is what you really want, because Emily has suffered enough, Richard nodded. I'll get the test today, he said. And when the results come in? When the results come in, you'll have to decide what kind of man you really are, Clara interrupted. The same one from 6 years ago, or someone different. Richard left the apartment with his mind reeling. During the drive back, he couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Clara was right about everything. He had been a coward, selfish, immature, and now he likely had a daughter who had paid the price for his mistakes. That afternoon, he took a DNA test at a private clinic. While waiting for the results, he spent the next few days obsessively remembering his relationship with Clara. She had been different from all the other women in his life. Genuine, intelligent, passionate about her work, she challenged him intellectually, made him laugh, inspired him to be a better person. When he was with her, Richard felt more real, and he had thrown it all away in one night of weakness. 3 days later, Margaret entered his office with a sealed envelope. The results are here, she said simply. Richard took the envelope with trembling hands. For a moment, he just held it, knowing that his life would change forever when he opened that paper. When he finally read the result, the words jumped off the page. 99.99% probability of paternity confirmed. Emily Jensen was his daughter. Richard sank into his chair, the paper trembling between his fingers. His entire life had been built on control, meticulous planning, carefully executed strategies. He controlled companies, influenced markets, made decisions that affected thousands of people. And now he discovered he had a 5-year-old daughter who had grown up without him, who lived in a small apartment while he lived in a penthouse, whose mother worked 2 jobs while he swam in privilege. For the first time in his adult life, Richard Hale cried. He cried for the daughter he didn't know, for the woman he had lost to his own stupidity, for the 5 years he could never get back, for the nights Emily had slept without a father. And as he cried alone in his office, he knew that his controlled life was over forever. Now he would have to learn to be a father, and he had no idea how to do that. 2 weeks had passed since Richard received the DNA test results. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, staring at the paper that confirmed what he already knew deep down. Emily was his daughter. He had spent those days trying to find the courage to call Clara, to ask to see Emily. Every morning he promised himself he would make the call, and every night he found himself still with the phone in his hand, unable to dial. Finally, on a rainy Thursday, he called, "Hello?" Clara's voice was tired. She was probably between jobs. "Clara, it's Richard." Silence on the other end of the line. The results came in now, he said, though he knew she already guessed. "I know," she replied simply. I'd like to meet Emily, for real this time." Another long silence. "She asks about you," Clara admitted finally. "Since that day at the theater, she wants to know if you're going to visit her." Richard felt his heart race. "So can I come on Saturday?" "Richard," Clara's voice turned serious, "if you start this, you can't stop halfway. Emily has already suffered enough thinking she doesn't have a father. If you show up in her life, you have to be sure you want to stay." "I'm sure." "Are you really? Because being a father isn't something you do when you have free time." "It's not a weekend project," Richard swallowed hard. "I understand that. Then you can come on Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. And Richard, yes, don't bring expensive gifts. Emily doesn't need toys. She needs a father." On Saturday, Richard parked his car in front of Clara's building at 2 o'clock sharp. His hands were sweating as he climbed the familiar stairs. He knocked on the door harder than he intended. Clara opened the door wearing jeans and a simple blouse. She looked more rested than last time. "She's excited," Clara said, stepping aside to let him in. Richard entered the apartment and immediately saw her. Emily was sitting on the sofa, wearing a pink dress with flowers, her blonde hair in 2 braids. She looked at him with those familiar blue eyes, but there was a shyness that wasn't present at the theater. "Hi, Emily," Richard said, and his voice came out more formally than he intended. "Hi," she replied softly, not moving from the sofa. Richard stood in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do. How was he supposed to act? What does a father say to a daughter he's meeting for the first time? Do you want to talk?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the armchair, keeping his distance. Emily nodded but continued to watch him with curiosity. "Do you live in a big house?" she asked suddenly. "I do, a big apartment. Does it have a yard?" "No, but it has a balcony." Emily seemed to process this information. "I wish I had a yard to plant flowers," she said. "Mommy said that when we have money, we'll live in a house with a yard." Richard felt a pang of guilt. He had a luxury penthouse while his daughter dreamed of a simple yard. Maybe you can visit my apartment one day, son, he offered. Not sure how Clara would react to that. Emily smiled for the first time. "Really? Does it have a big TV?" "It does." "And video games?" Richard shook his head. He didn't have video games. He didn't have anything a child would like. "No, but I can buy one," he said quickly. Clara, who was in the kitchen making juice, appeared in the doorway with a warning look. She had told him not to try to compensate with gifts. "Do you know how to play video games?" Emily asked, tilting her head. Not really, but I can learn." Emily studied him for a moment. "Do you work a lot?" The question was simple, but it hit Richard hard. "I do. Every day. Most days. Even on Saturdays." Richard hesitated. He usually worked on Saturdays. It was when he could catch up on overdue reports. "Sometimes." Emily nodded, as if this confirmed something she already knew. "Mommy works a lot too. She comes home late and leaves early." Richard looked at Clara, who was leaning against the doorframe, watching the conversation in silence. There was something in her expression he couldn't decipher. "Emily," he said, trying to sound closer, "what do you like to do?" "Drawing," she replied immediately, "and reading, and watching cartoons. And playing house." Can you show me your drawings? Emily got up from the sofa and ran to her room. Richard followed her, curious to see the space where his daughter lived. The room was small but cozy, a single bed with colourful sheets, a small wooden desk, and shelves full of books and a few toys. The walls were covered with drawings. "This one is me," Emily said, pointing to a drawing of a girl with yellow hair. "And this is Mommy." A figure with brown hair. Richard noticed that in almost all the drawings, there were only two figures, mother and daughter. He was nowhere to be found. "This drawing is of my school," Emily continued, showing another paper. "So when this is our house," there was something touching in the simplicity of the drawings, a child drawing her small but complete world. "You draw very well," Richard said, and he was sincere. "Do you want to draw with me?" Emily asked, grabbing a blank sheet of paper and some crayons. Richard looked at the paper and then at the girl. It had been decades since he had drawn. He didn't even know where to start. "I'm not very good at drawing." "It's okay, I'll teach you." Emily sat on the floor and patted the spot next to her, indicating where Richard should sit. He sat down awkwardly on the floor, his expensive suit wrinkling on the small rug. "What do you want to draw?" she asked. "I don't know." "What do you think?" "A house." Emily started drawing with quick, confident strokes. Richard picked up a green crayon and tried to make something that looked like a tree. The result was terrible. Emily laughed. "It looks like a giant broccoli." Richard looked at his drawing and had to agree. It was ridiculous, but Emily's laugh was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "Let me help you," she said, taking the crayon from his hand. When her small fingers touched Richard's hand, something happened inside him. It was as if someone had turned on a light that had been off for years. Her hand was so small, so warm, so confident. Richard froze, looking at that little hand on his daughter. His daughter was touching him, wanting to help him, to include him in her simple, pure world. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. "Daddy," Emily said softly, "are you okay?" The word Daddy hit him like a lightning bolt. Emily had called him Daddy naturally, without hesitation, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I am," he managed to say, his voice huskier than usual. Emily kept holding his hand as she helped draw the tree. Richard tried to focus on the drawing, but all he could think about was that small touch that was breaking down all his defenses. "There," Emily said, letting go of his hand. "Now it looks like a real tree." Richard looked at the paper. The drawing wasn't a masterpiece, but to him it was perfect. He and his daughter had created something together. "It's beautiful," he said, and he meant it. They spent another hour drawing. Richard tried to relax, but it was hard. He didn't know how to play, how to be spontaneous. Every move felt forced, every word seemed inadequate. At 4 in the afternoon, his cell phone rang. It was the office. "Excuse me," he said, answering. "Mr. Hale, we need your approval for the Peterson Holdings contract." Richard listened as Margaret explained a situation that needed his urgent attention. It was important, but he looked at Emily, who had stopped drawing and was watching him talk on the phone. "I handle it on Monday," he said, hanging up quickly. "Was that work?" Emily asked. It was, but it wasn't important. A lie. It was important. But suddenly, sitting on the floor drawing with his daughter seemed more important than any contract. At 5 in the afternoon, Richard knew he had to leave. He had a business dinner at 8 and still needed to prepare. "I have to go," he said, getting up from the floor. Emily looked disappointed. "Already?" "I have a work commitment." "Will you come back?" The simple question caught him off guard. "I will, if your mom lets me." Emily looked at Clara, who was watching from the bedroom doorway. "Mommy, can he come back?" "If he wants to," Clara replied carefully. "I want to," Richard said quickly. "Can I come back next week?" "You can." Richard headed for the door, Emily following him. At the last minute, she ran and hugged his legs. "Bye, Daddy." Richard stood still, Looking at the blonde head resting against his legs, he hesitantly placed his hand on her hair. "Sabach, Emily." When he left the apartment, Richard was completely shaken. That simple hug had affected him more than any deal he had ever closed. Over the next week, he tried to maintain his normal routine, but it was impossible. Emily was always on his mind. In the middle of important meetings, he would find himself remembering her laugh, the way she had held his hand. The following Saturday, he returned. This time he brought a simple jigsaw puzzle. Clara frowned but said nothing. "You came!" Emily shouted when she saw him, running to hug him again. They put the puzzle together. Richard tried to be more present, more relaxed, but it was still difficult. He didn't know how to talk to a child, how to enter her world. His cell phone rang 3 times during the visit. The first time, he answered. The second, he quickly hung up. The third, he didn't even look at the device. Emily noticed. "Your phone won't stop ringing," she said. "It's work." "Do you always work?" Richard hesitated. "I work a lot, yes. More than Mommy." Richard looked at Clara, who was folding clothes in the living room, trying to give them privacy, but clearly listening to everything. "I don't know. Your mom works a lot too. But she's not on the phone when she's with me." The simple observation hit him hard. It was true. Even with 2 jobs, when Clara was home, she was truly present. "You're right," he admitted. "I'll try to be on the phone less." Emily smiled. "Promise?" "I promise." But it was a difficult promise to keep. The following week, Richard tried to keep his cell phone away during meetings, but it was impossible. His companies needed him constantly. Clients called Coparsi, problems arose, decisions had to be made. On the 3rd Saturday, he arrived late. A meeting had run long, and by the time he finally managed to leave, it was already 3:30 in the afternoon. Emily was at the window, waiting. "You're late," she said when he arrived. "I'm sorry. I had a meeting that—" "There's always a meeting," she interrupted, and there was a sadness in her voice that made him stop. Richard looked at her, then at Clara, who was watching in silence. "Emily, It's okay," she said, but Richard could see it wasn't okay. "You're busy." They played for 2 hours, but Richard noticed that Emily was different. Less spontaneous, more cautious, as if she were protecting herself. When his cell phone rang at 6 in the evening, Emily just sighed. "You can answer it," she said. "I know it's important." Richard looked at his phone, then at his daughter. For the first time, he didn't answer. "It's not more important than you," he said. Emily smiled, but Richard realized that the trust had been shaken. On the 4th visit, he noticed the pattern that was forming. He arrived late, left early, always kept his phone in hand. Emily just wanted his presence, his full attention, but he couldn't give her that. During the week, he reflected on this. He was trying to be a father the way he did everything in life, calculated, controlled, dividing his attention among multiple priorities. But being a father didn't work that way. Emily didn't want a part of him. She wanted all of him, and Richard realized he was at a crossroads. Either he fully embraced the role of a father, dedicating real time and genuine energy to Emily, or he would continue to hurt her with his partial presence. He couldn't be a part-time dad. That would be worse than not being a father at all. The question that haunted him was he really ready to change his entire life for a 5-year-old girl he barely knew? The answer terrified him, because he still didn't know what it was. On the 5th visit, Richard made a promise. "Next Saturday," he said, watching Emily arrange her drawings in a careful pile. "I'll come earlier, at 10 in the morning. We can spend the whole day together." Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at him with shining eyes. "Ja, the whole day. The whole day. No meetings, no phone, no work. Do you really promise?" Richard hesitated for just a second before answering. "I promise." Emily jumped for joy and ran to hug him. Richard felt that familiar sensation, his heart clenching in a way that was both good and painful at the same time. I'll show you all my drawings, she said, excited. And we can play house and I'll teach you how to make cookies like Mummy taught me, and... Slow down, Richard laughed. We have the whole day. The following week, Emily talked about nothing else. Clara told Richard in a quick call on Thursday that the girl was counting the days on the calendar, marking each passing day with an X. She's very excited, Clara said, and there was a warning tone in her voice. Please, don't disappoint her. I won't, Richard promised. On Friday night, Richard went home with the firm intention of having a completely free Saturday. He shut down his office computer, left the reports on his desk, and told Margaret he didn't want to be disturbed for any reason. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, he was getting dressed to leave when the phone rang. It was James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, one of Richard's biggest clients. Richard, we need to talk urgently. There's been a problem with the merger contract. Their lawyers found a clause that could jeopardize the entire deal. Richard looked at the clock. 9:15. There was still time to resolve this and get to Clara's apartment by 10. Can it be quick, James? I have an important appointment at 10. It won't be quick. We'll need at least 3 hours to review all the documents and prepare a counter-proposal. Richard felt his stomach sink. James, I can't today. Richard, we're talking about $40 million. If we don't resolve this today, they could cancel everything on Monday. $40 million, the kind of deal that could affect hundreds of jobs, that could change the future of his company. Richard looked at the clock again. 9:20. Where are you? In my office. My lawyers are on their way. Richard closed his eyes. Emily would be waking up now, probably getting ready, excited to spend the day with him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up the phone and stood for a moment, looking at himself in the mirror. He was wearing jeans and a casual shirt, clothes he had chosen specifically to play with Emily. He picked up his phone to call Clara, but hesitated. What was he going to say? That a $40 million contract was more important than his daughter. He decided he would sort everything out quickly and still arrive on time, maybe an hour or two late. Emily would understand. He grabbed his car keys and left. Meanwhile, in the apartment in the industrial district, Emily woke up at 8 in the morning, an hour earlier than usual. She had gone to sleep the night before talking about all the plans she had for the day. Mommy, she said, running into Clara's room in her pajamas, he's coming today. Clara slowly opened her eyes and smiled at her daughter, whose hair was messy from sleep. It's still early, sweetie. He's only coming at 10. But I have to get ready and organize my toys and choose which drawings to show him. Emily spent the entire morning preparing with the care of a princess getting ready for a ball. She took a bath, brushed her teeth twice, and chose her favorite dress, the blue one with white flowers that she saved for special occasions. She carefully combed her hair and asked Clara to make 2 perfect braids with yellow ribbons. Do I look pretty, Mommy? She asked, looking at herself in the small bathroom mirror. You look beautiful, sweetie. In the living room, Emily arranged all her toys in a careful row on the sofa. Dolls with neat dresses, cars organized by size, puzzles stacked, books arranged from smallest to largest. Everything she wanted to show her father was perfectly laid out. Look, Mommy, she said, proudly pointing to her arrangement. This is where we'll play house. He can be the daddy and I can be the real daughter. These are the books I'll read to him, and these are the games he can choose from. Clara watched her daughter with a heavy heart. Emily had placed so much expectation on this day, so much love and hope in every detail. By 9:30, Emily was already sitting in the armchair near the window, her legs swinging with anxiety, looking out at the street. It's not time yet, Clara reminded her. I know, but I want to see his car arrive. I want to wave from the window. At 10 o'clock sharp, Emily was still at the window, now more tense, watching every car that passed. He said 10 o'clock. Right, Mommy? She asked, without taking her eyes off the window. He did. Maybe he's stuck in traffic. At 10:15, Emily started making up explanations. Maybe his car broke down, or maybe he's looking for a parking spot. At 10:30, Emily started to get restless, shifting in the armchair. "Shy, Mommy, do you think he forgot?" "I'm sure he didn't forget, sweetie." At 11 o'clock, the phone rang. Emily jumped from the armchair as if she had been shocked. "It's him. He must be calling to say he's on his way." Clara answered the phone with Emily glued to her side. "Clara, I can explain." Richard's voice made Clara's stomach sink. "Where are you?" she asked, looking at Emily's, who was waiting anxiously. I'm in an emergency meeting. A very serious problem came up with an important client." "Richard, you promised." I know, but this is extremely important. $40 million are on the line." Clara felt anger rising inside her. "And Emily? She's been here since 8 in the morning, all dressed up, waiting for you." "Is Daddy coming?" Emily whispered, pulling on her mother's shirt. "I'll make it up to her," Richard continued. "I can come tomorrow or next week." "Make it up to her." Clara's voice came out louder than she intended. "Richard, she's a 5-year-old child. She doesn't understand making it up. Clara, please, try to understand. This is my career." "I understand perfectly. You haven't changed at all. You're still the same selfish man from 6 years ago." Clara hung up the phone with force. Emily, who had heard the conversation, asked in the smallest voice Clara had ever heard, "He's not coming?" Clara looked at her daughter, all dressed up, in her special dress, her eyes full of expectation, and felt her heart shatter. "No, sweetie. He had an important problem at work." Emily didn't say anything for a long moment. She just nodded slowly and went back to the window. "Maybe he'll come later," she said softly, "when his work is finished." Clara knew he wouldn't come. She knew Richard well enough to know that when he got involved in a work situation, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The hours passed with painful slowness. Emily stayed at the window, sometimes leaving to play with her organized toys, but always returning to her watch post. At noon, she asked, "Mommy, can I have lunch here by the window, so I don't miss him when he arrives?" Clara made a cheese sandwich and served it on the small table next to the armchair. Emily only ate half, always looking out at the street. During the afternoon, Emily tried to stay optimistic. "Maybe he'll come after lunch," she would say every hour. "Or maybe he's buying a surprise, and that's why he's taking so long." At 4 in the afternoon, Emily finally left the window and sat on the sofa amidst her organized toys. "Mommy," she said, looking at her own hands, "do you think he doesn't like me?" The question stabbed Clara like a dagger. "Of course he likes you, sweetie. A lot." "Then why didn't he come? People who like us don't break their promises, right?" Clara had no answer for that. How could she explain to a 5-year-old child that her father had chosen money over her? "How sometimes adults make bad choices," she finally said. Emily nodded, as if that made sense. "Like when I choose not to do my homework and you get sad." Something like that, but worse. At 6 in the evening, Emily quietly put her toys away, one by one. She carefully folded her special dress and put on her pajamas. "I'm not waiting anymore," she told Clara. "I don't think he's coming after all." Clara helped her brush her teeth and undo her braids. Emily was quiet, not talking about the day, not complaining, not crying. Somehow, that was worse than if she had thrown a tantrum. At 8 at night, Emily was in bed, but Clara could hear her tossing and turning. She went to check and found her daughter sitting up, looking out the bedroom window. "I can't stop looking," Emily said. "What if he comes now and I'm asleep?" "If he comes, I'll wake you up, I promise." "Do you really promise?" "Because I don't want to miss it. I really promise." Emily reluctantly lay down, but Clara could see she was still looking at the door, waiting to hear footsteps on the stairs. "Mommy," Emily whispered in the dark, "will he come tomorrow?" "I don't know, sweetie. Does he still like me?" "He likes you, yes." "A lot. Then why do people who like us make us sad?" Clara had no answer for that question. Sometimes adults make mistakes, even when they love someone. Emily was quiet for a moment. Big mistakes. Very big. At 9 o'clock, Emily finally fell asleep. But even in her sleep, her little face was turned toward the door as if still expecting her father to appear. Clara watched her sleeping daughter and felt an anger she hadn't felt in years. Richard had broken Emily's heart just as he had broken hers 6 years ago. On Sunday morning, the phone rang early. It was Richard. "Clara, I can explain everything." "I don't want explanations," she interrupted, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Emily. The meeting lasted all day. By the time it was over, it was already very late. "Richard, do you think that matters to a 5-year-old child? I know it was terrible, but you don't understand the pressure." "Terrible? She spent the entire day waiting for you. The entire day, Richard, dressed up, excited, looking out the window." Richard was silent on the other end of the line. "Jay, how can I fix this?" "I don't know if you can," Clara said, her voice like ice. "Do you know what Emily asked me yesterday? If you didn't like her, my God, if you want to be her father, you can't make plans and not show up. That hurts more than never showing up at all. If you're not ready, then disappear from our lives. Clara, please." "No, Richard." "Enough. I won't let you keep hurting my daughter. Either you step up for real or you get out of her life. I want to step up. I want to be her father." "Wanting isn't enough. You need to prove it." Clara hung up the phone and went to make breakfast. When Emily woke up, the first thing she asked was, "Did he call?" "He called," Clara admitted. "But what did he say?" "He said he had an urgent problem at work." Emily nodded as if expecting that answer. "Is he coming today?" "I don't know, sweetie." Emily ate her breakfast in silence. She didn't ask about her father anymore, didn't talk about the previous day, didn't complain. But Clara noticed she didn't organize her toys, didn't dress up specially, didn't watch from the window. It was as if Emily had learned, at 5 years old, not to put too much hope in the promises of adults. During the day, Emily played normally, but there was something different about her, a caution that wasn't there before. At night, when Clara was putting Emily to bed, the girl asked a question. "Mommy, if I'm a really good girl, will he want to stay with me?" "Sweetie, you're already a really good girl, the best in the world." "Then why doesn't he want to stay with me?" Clara hugged her daughter. "Sometimes adults have problems that have nothing to do with you. You're perfect, Emily." Emily nodded against her mother's chest. "Can I still like him even if he doesn't come anymore?" The question broke Clara's heart. "You can like him, yes, but I can't wait for him, right?" "You don't have to wait, sweetie. You can live your life and be happy." Emily thought for a moment. "And what if he shows up one day? Then you two can talk, but only if he proves he's changed." "How will he prove it?" "By showing up when he promises, by showing that you're important to him." "And what if he can't?" Clara took a deep breath. "Then he'll lose the chance to know the most amazing girl in the world." Emily smiled for the first time since she had woken up. "I'm pretty amazing, aren't I, Mommy? The most amazing of all." Meanwhile, Richard spent the entire Sunday trying to find a way to fix what he had broken. But for the first time in his life, his money and power couldn't solve the problem. He had lost his daughter's trust. The question that tormented him was it too late to change? Or was there still a chance to prove to Emily that he could be the father she deserved? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. There would be no second chance for a first impression. Emily had learned that promises could be broken, and Richard had learned that being a father required much more than he had ever imagined. Happy? And if he shows up one day and proves he's changed, then you two can talk. Emily thought for a moment. How will he prove he's changed? By showing up when he promises, by not putting his phone before you, by showing that you're important to him. And if he can't prove it, Clara took a deep breath, then he'll lose the chance to know the most amazing girl in the world. Emily smiled for the first time since she had woken up. "I am pretty amazing, aren't I, Mommy? The most amazing of all." Meanwhile, Richard spent the entire Sunday trying to find a way to fix what he had broken. But for the first time in his life, his money, his power, and his influence couldn't solve the problem. He had lost his daughter's trust, and maybe, probably, there was no way to get it back. The question that tormented him was it too late to change, or was there still a chance to prove to Emily and to himself that he could be the father she deserved? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: there would be no second chance for a first impression. Emily had learned that promises could be broken, and Richard had learned that being a father required much more than he had ever thought possible. Monday arrived like a perfect storm. Richard arrived at his office at 7 in the morning, as he had for 20 years, but found a crowd of journalists at the building's entrance. Flashes went off, microphones were extended, questions flew from all sides. "Mr. Hale, is it true you abandoned a 5-year-old daughter? How do you respond to the accusations of irresponsible fatherhood? Will you publicly acknowledge the child?" Richard walked past the reporters without a word, protected by security, but he could feel the weight of the stares, the cameras, the media's voracious speculation. In his office, Margaret was waiting for him with a pile of newspapers and a grim expression. "The headlines aren't good," she said, spreading the newspapers across his desk. Richard read the headlines in silence. "The dark side of the philanthropist billionaire. Hale abandons daughter while preaching ethics. The child who confronted her father on TV. Rich businessman, poor father." Each headline was worse than the last. Photos of Emily leaving the theater, of Clara at work, of Richard himself during lectures on social responsibility. The irony was not lost on the journalists. "The video from the theater already has over 2 million views," Margaret continued. "It's on social media, on TV shows, everywhere." Richard sat down heavily in his chair. In 3 days, his carefully built reputation of several decades was publicly crumbling. "And there's more," Margaret said hesitantly. "Some clients are questioning contracts. They say they don't want to be associated with a man who abandons his children." The phone rang incessantly. Requests for interviews, comments, explanations. Richard had Margaret cancel all his meetings for the week. At 10 in the morning, his father showed up at the office. Edward Hale, at 72, was still an imposing presence. Tall, with perfectly combed grey hair, an impeccable suit, and that expression that always made Richard feel like a boy being reprimanded. "We need to talk," Edward said, closing the door behind him. "Dad, I don't want to hear explanations. I want solutions." Edward sat in the armchair across from Richard's desk. "This situation needs to be controlled before it destroys everything we've built." Richard looked at his father, the man who had shaped his entire life, his choices, his values. "And how do you suggest I control it? The girl is my daughter. The DNA test confirmed it." "That doesn't matter now," Edward said coldly. "What matters is protecting our family, our company, our reputation." "Our reputation? Richard, do you have any idea how many jobs depend on Hale Industries? How many families depend on us? Are you going to sacrifice all that because of a past mistake?" His father's words irritated him. "Emily is not a mistake. She is my daughter." Edward sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Listen, son, you can handle this discreetly. Set up a generous allowance for the mother, secure the child's future, but maintain a public distance. Over time, people will forget. That's how the world works, Richard. You should know that by now." Richard watched his father for a long moment. There was something in the way Edward spoke, a certainty that went beyond simple concern for his reputation. "Why are you so worried about this, Dad?" "Because I'm your father. Because I care about your future. Or because you know more about this situation than you're letting on." Edward hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Richard to notice. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about how you reacted when you met Clara. I remember you saying she wasn't right for our family. She wasn't. And the facts proved me right. What facts? Edward got up from the armchair and walked to the window. Richard, you need to understand something. Sometimes, to protect the people we love, we have to make difficult decisions. What decisions? Decisions they may not understand at the time, but that are necessary. Richard felt a chill in his stomach. There was something in his father's voice, a veiled admission that alarmed him. Dad, what did you do? Edward turned to face him. I did what any father would do. I protected my son from a mistake that could destroy his future. What mistake? Clara loved me. Clara Jensen was an elementary school teacher from a simple family. You were destined for greater things. And who decides that, you? Edward approached Richard's desk. I have experience, son. I know how the world works. I knew that relationship wouldn't work out. So what exactly did you do? The silence that followed was deafening. Edward sat down again, but now he seemed less confident. Dad, Richard said slowly, I need to know, what did you do? Edward sighed deeply. I knew about the pregnancy. The words fell like a bomb in the silent office. You knew. Clara came to me before she told you. She was confused, scared. She thought that, as your father, I could help. Richard felt as if the floor was disappearing from under his feet. And what did you say to her? I told her you weren't ready to be a father, that you had plans for your career that a child would get in the way of. You had no right to speak for me. I did. I'm your father. It was my responsibility to protect you. Richard stood up from his chair, pacing the room. Is that why she broke up with me? Because you convinced her I didn't want her? Partly. Partly. What else did you do? Edward hesitated again. Richard could see the internal struggle on his father's face. Dad, tell me everything, now. I created situations to show her what kind of man you really were. What situations? The secretary. Richard stopped pacing. What secretary? Amanda. I asked her to get close to you, to try and seduce you. Richard's world completely fell apart. You what? I knew Clara would eventually find out, and when she did, she would see that you couldn't be trusted. Richard leaned on the desk, feeling dizzy. You set me up to cheat on Clara. I created an opportunity. You chose to take it. I was drunk, I was confused. Amanda kept insisting. And you gave in, Edward interrupted. That proves I was right. If you truly loved Clara, you wouldn't have given in. Richard looked at his father with a mixture of horror and disgust. You destroyed my life. I saved your life. You became one of the most respected businessmen in the country. You built an empire. Would you have all that married to an elementary school teacher and raising a daughter in your 20s? Maybe I would have been happy. Happiness is a luxury, Richard. Success is a necessity. Richard sat down again, trying to process everything he had discovered. Did Clara know? About your manipulation. She found out later, I told her. You told her. When she came to tell me about the pregnancy, I explained that I had tested you and that you had failed the test. That's why she never contacted me. That's why she made the right choice. She protected the child from a father who wasn't ready. Richard was silent for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of his father's betrayal. All these years, he finally said, I thought I had been a coward, that I had destroyed the best relationship of my life out of weakness, and that's exactly what happened. No! Richard slammed his fist on the desk. I was manipulated. You manipulated me. I tested you and you failed. With the help of a situation you created. Edward stood up, adjusting his jacket. Richard, that was 6 years ago. There's no point in reliving the past. What matters now is how you handle the present situation. And how should I handle it? The way I already told you. An allowance for the mother, public distance. Let time do the rest. Richard looked at his father and finally saw who Edward Hale really was. Not the wise, protective man he had admired his whole life, but a cold manipulator who had destroyed his chance at happiness. No. What do you mean, no? I'm not going to do that. Emily is my daughter, and I'm going to acknowledge her publicly. Richard, be reasonable. Reasonable? Like you were reasonable when you destroyed my relationship with Clara. Edward walked to the door. You're making a mistake, son. Maybe, but this time it will be my mistake, not yours. Edward stopped at the door. If you do this, you'll be on your own. Don't count on my support. I don't need your support anymore, Dad. I needed it my whole life, and look where it got me. After Edward left, Richard was alone in the office, looking out the window at the city below. It all made sense now. The way Clara had reacted to the betrayal, how she had refused to listen to his explanations, how she had disappeared from his life so completely. She hadn't just discovered an affair. She had discovered that everything, the relationship, the trust, the future they planned together, had been a game for his father. But there was one truth Richard couldn't ignore. Even though he was manipulated, he had made the choices. He had given in to Amanda's seduction. He had drunk too much. He had broken Clara's trust. His father had created the situation, but he had chosen how to react. And that choice had cost him 6 years of his daughter's life. Richard picked up the phone and dialed Clara's number. It was time to tell her the whole truth. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to fix what his father had broken, but this time he would do things the right way, even if it cost him everything he had built. Richard parked his car in front of Clara's building 2 weeks after the conversation with his father. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, meetings with lawyers, and decisions that would change his life forever. He climbed the familiar stairs, but this time with a different determination. He was no longer the confused man who had shown up there months ago. He was someone who finally understood the weight of his choices. Clara opened the door, and Richard saw immediately that she was different too. There was a hardness in her eyes that wasn't there before. Richard, Emily's at school. Actually, I came to talk to you. Clara hesitated, then stepped away from the door to let him in. The apartment seemed smaller than he remembered. Or maybe it was because now he truly saw the life Clara had built alone, the daily struggle, the sacrifices, the strength it took to raise Emily without help. Coffee, she offered, but her tone was formal, distant. Please. They sat at the kitchen table, as they had done so many times in the past, but now there was an ocean of hurt between them. "And I found out some things," Richard began, "about what happened 6 years ago." Clara didn't answer, just waited. "My father knew about your pregnancy before I did." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You went to him first. He told me." "I was scared, Richard. I was confused. I thought he could help me find a way to tell you. And he convinced you I wasn't ready. He said you had plans for your career, that a child would ruin everything." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the anger he had felt in his office all over again. He lied. He lied. He did more than convince you. He set me up to cheat on you. Clara froze. "What are you saying?" "Amanda, the secretary. My father asked her to seduce me. He knew you would eventually find out." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara processed the information, and Richard could see the anger growing in her eyes. "So you were manipulated," she said finally. "I was, but that doesn't absolve me." Clara looked at him, surprised. "I had choices, Clara. Even manipulated, even pressured. I could have resisted. I could have trusted what we felt for each other. But I didn't." Richard leaned forward, his hands trembling. "I messed up. I was weak. I let my father push us apart. I gave in when I should have fought. I betrayed you when I should have protected you." Clara listened in silence, her eyes fixed on him. "I'm not worthy of your forgiveness. I know I'm not. But I want you to know one thing. I'm never running away again." "What does that mean?" Richard took some papers from the folder he had brought. It means that this morning I officially registered Emily as my daughter. It's right here. He showed her the updated birth certificate. Emily Hale Jensen. She'll have my last name if she wants, or she can keep just Jensen. The choice is hers. Clara took the paper with trembling hands. You did this. I did. And there's more. Richard pulled out other documents. I set up a trust fund in Emily's name. $500,000 now, plus $50,000 a year until she turns 18. After that, if she wants to go to college, it's all paid for. If she wants to travel the world, start a business, anything, she'll have the means. Clara stared at the papers, unable to speak. And there's more, Richard continued. I bought a house for you both. It's not a mansion, it's not extravagant. It's a simple house, 3 bedrooms, a yard in a good neighborhood, near an excellent school. Richard, let me finish. The house is in your name. Not mine, not Emily's. Yours, you owe me nothing. If you never want to see me again, the house is still yours. Clara finally found her voice. Why are you doing this? Because for 5 years, Emily didn't have a father. For 5 years, you raised our daughter alone, working 2 jobs, sacrificing. I can't get that time back, but I can make sure you never struggle again. Richard took a deep breath. And because I found out my father was right about one thing, I wasn't ready to be a father 6 years ago. But I'm ready now. Clara studied his face for a long moment. Do you think money solves everything? No, I know it doesn't. But it's a start. It's my way of showing I'm serious. And if I say I don't want any of this, that I'd rather keep living as I always have. Richard had prepared for this possibility. Then I'll respect your decision. But Emily will still be my daughter, and I'll still want to be a part of her life if you'll let me. Clara got up from the table and walked to the window. Do you know how many nights I've spent awake these past 5 years? How many times Emily asked about her father? How many times I had to explain why you weren't here? I imagine a lot. Not a lot, Richard. All of them. Every single night. The pain in her voice cut Richard's heart. Emily asked me if you didn't like her. A 5-year-old child questioning if she's worthy of her father's love. Richard felt his eyes burn. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back 5 years, Richard. I know. Clara turned to face him. Do you want to know what hurts me the most? Richard nodded. It's not just that you weren't here, it's that you could have been. If you had trusted me, if you had fought for us, if you had stood up to your father, Emily could have grown up with her dad. You're right about everything. I'm tired of being right, Richard. I'm tired of carrying everything alone. Richard stood up too. Then let me help. Not as a way to redeem myself. I know that's impossible. But as Emily's father. Clara looked at the papers on the table again. You did all this without even talking to me. I did, because regardless of your answer, Emily is my daughter. And she deserves to have financial security. And if I forbid you from seeing her, Richard swallowed hard. I would respect your decision, but I would beg you to reconsider. Clara was silent for a long moment. Words don't erase years of abandonment, Richard. I know. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I know that too. And Emily? Emily learned to live without a father. I don't know how she'll react to suddenly having one. Richard moved closer, but kept a respectful distance. Then let me try, slowly, on her time, on your time. Clara sighed deeply. If I agree, and that's a very big if, it would be with conditions. What are they? Emily comes first, always. If you make plans with her, you show up. If you promise something, you keep it. There's no meeting, contract, or emergency that justifies disappointing her again. I agree. Second condition, you don't try to buy me. The house, the money, that's fine. But don't think it gives you any rights over me. Understood. Third condition, if at any point I think you're hurting Emily, it's over. There are no second chances. Richard nodded solemnly. I agree to everything. Clara returned to the table and looked at the papers again. "I need to think. How much time do you need?" "I don't know. Days. Weeks. Maybe months." Richard nodded. "I'll wait, for as long as it takes." He walked to the door, then turned back. "Clara." "Yes, thank you, for raising Emily alone, for protecting her, for being the amazing mother you are." Clara didn't reply, but Richard saw something soften in her eyes. When he left the apartment, he knew he had done everything he could. He had humbled himself, admitted his mistakes, offered everything he had. Now, for the first time in his life, he would have to wait for a decision he couldn't control. And strangely, that no longer scared him. For the first time in years, Richard Hale was doing the right thing. Richard spent 3 days planning every word of the announcement. There was no script for a situation like this. A public figure publicly acknowledging a child he had denied, admitting to mistakes that could destroy his career. On Thursday, at 2 in the afternoon, he called a press conference in the auditorium of the Metropolitan Hotel, the same hotel where, months ago, he had spoken about ethics and social responsibility. The irony was impossible to ignore. The auditorium was more crowded than usual. Journalists from every major outlet, television cameras, photographers, some reporters specialized in corporate scandals, others focused on human interest stories. The mix created a palpable tension in the air. Richard took the stage wearing a simple navy blue suit, without the usual pomp of his business events. There were no slides with impressive graphs, no elaborate presentation with background music. Just him, a microphone, and the truth he had avoided for so long. He stood behind the podium, adjusted the microphone, and took a deep breath. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "Said a few weeks ago, a brave 5-year-old girl walked onto this very stage and made an accusation that changed my life forever." The camera flashes started firing immediately, creating an intermittent light show, but Richard kept his eyes focused on the audience. "Emily Jensen is my daughter. A DNA test confirmed what I should have known from the first moment I looked into her eyes and saw my own reflection." A murmur rippled through the auditorium like a wave. It was the first time Richard had publicly acknowledged his paternity, and everyone knew they were witnessing a historic moment. For 5 years, Emily grew up without a father. Not because I didn't know of her existence, but because I made cowardly choices that separated us, choices that I am deeply ashamed of. Richard paused deliberately, letting the words sink in. He knew every journalist was taking notes. Every camera was recording this public admission of guilt. 6 years ago, I was engaged to Clara Jensen, Emily's mother. I loved Clara deeply. She was the most genuine and principled woman I had ever known, but I wasn't man enough to fight for that love when it was tested. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every gesture, every moment of vulnerability. I betrayed Clara's trust. I broke promises I had made. And by the time she found out she was pregnant, I had already destroyed any chance of us being a family. Richard stepped slightly away from the podium, moving closer to the audience. Clara made the bravest decision a woman can make, to raise Emily alone. For 5 years, she worked 2 jobs, sacrificed her own dreams, and gave our daughter all the love that 2 parents would have. His voice grew stronger, more determined. Meanwhile, I built a career talking about social responsibility and business ethics. A complete hypocrisy. How can I give speeches on family values when I abandoned my own family? How can I talk about integrity when I ran from the most basic responsibilities of a man? Several journalists raised their hands, but Richard continued, "Today, I am here to publicly acknowledge my daughter and my mistakes. Emily Hale Jensen is officially my daughter. Her name is on the birth certificate, and she will have all the rights that implies. I'm not doing this because of media pressure or to save my image. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Richard took an official paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. I also want to announce that I have created a $2 million educational fund in Emily's name. This will guarantee her education from elementary school through postgraduate studies, if she chooses. The money has been deposited and will be managed by an independent foundation. The murmurs grew louder, and some journalists began typing rapidly. But more important than any amount of money are the fundamental changes I am making in my life. Starting today, I will drastically reduce my work schedule. I will prioritize what truly matters, being a father. Richard paused, looking directly at the main cameras. I know many of you will question why it took me so long to do this. The answer is simple. I was a coward. I was afraid to face my mistakes, afraid to take on responsibilities that could change my life. He walked to the right side of the stage. For those who have lost faith in me as a businessman, I completely understand. For those who question my integrity as a person, you are right to do so. Richard returned to the center of the stage. Then but to Emily, my daughter, I promise that from now on she will be my #1 priority. Not when it's convenient, but always. He took a deep breath, preparing for the end. I'm not here asking for forgiveness from the press or the public. Forgiveness is something you earn with actions, not with words. I am here taking full responsibility. The questions from the journalists came like an avalanche. They were direct, some hostile, others curious. Why didn't you acknowledge paternity when the child was born? Because I was a coward and selfish. There is no other explanation. Isn't this just a marketing stunt? If it were marketing, I would have hired a public relations firm to create a more favorable story for me. I'm here saying I was a terrible father and a cowardly man. That's not exactly an effective image strategy. When the press conference ended, almost 3 hours later, Richard knew he had publicly and irreversibly changed his life. A week after the press conference, Richard stood in front of a simple 2-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood. A tree-lined street, well-kept houses, a neighborhood where children played on the sidewalks and neighbors greeted each other by name. The house had a large yard, a few fruit trees, and a cozy porch with rocking chairs. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable and dignified. Exactly what a family needed to be happy. Clara was by his side, holding the keys with slightly trembling hands. Are you absolutely sure about this? She asked for the 10th time. I am. The house is yours, Clara. It's in your name, paid in full, no matter what happens between us. Clara took a deep breath and opened the door. The smell of fresh paint and new furniture greeted them. Richard had hired a decorator, but with specific instructions. Nothing luxurious, just a cozy and functional home. The living room had comfortable sofas in neutral tones, a moderately sized television, and shelves with children's books. The kitchen was spacious, with a large table where a family could have meals together. Everything was simple, but of good quality. Emily? Clara called, her voice echoing through the new house. The girl came running from the kitchen, where she was exploring the cabinets, her eyes shining with curiosity. Is this our new house? She asked, twirling in the middle of the living room. It is, Clara replied, still processing the reality. What do you think? Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she ran off to explore every corner of the new house. She climbed the stairs to see the bedrooms, went down to check the pantry, opened all the doors and drawers, and tested the faucets, as if she wanted to make sure it was all real and not a dream. Mommy, my room has a window that looks out to the garden, she shouted from upstairs. Is there a yard? Emily shouted, running down the stairs. There is, Richard replied, smiling. Want to see? They went out the back door, and Emily found herself in a yard that seemed to come straight out of her dreams. Well-kept green grass, a few large trees, flower beds ready for planting, and even a wooden swing hanging from a sturdy branch. Can I plant flowers? She asked, running to the empty flower bed and kneeling in the dirt. You can plant whatever you want, Richard said, kneeling beside her. Flowers, vegetables, herbs, a whole garden if you want. Emily started running around the yard as if she had never seen so much green space. She tested the swing, which creaked gently. She explored every corner, every tree, discovering small hidden details. "Mommy, look, I can see the whole sky," Emily shouted, throwing herself on the grass and looking up, her arms outstretched. Richard watched, feeling an emotion he couldn't name. For the first time, he was seeing Emily truly happy and free without the limitations of the small apartment. Clara approached Richard, standing beside him. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with complex emotions. "Don't thank me. It's the least I can do after 5 years of absence." They stood in silence, watching Emily discover every detail of the yard. "Richard," Clara said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Anything. Why are you doing all of this? The press conference, the house, the fund, why now?" Richard thought carefully about the question. "Do you want the honest answer?" "I always prefer the truth, because I found out my father manipulated me 6 years ago, and because I realized the life I built is completely empty without you two." Clara turned to face him, surprised. "Your father manipulated you how?" Richard told her the whole story. How Edward had known about the pregnancy before him, how he had convinced Clara that he wasn't ready, how he had orchestrated the situation with Amanda. "My God," Clara whispered when he finished, "he really did that." "He did. But Clara," Richard said, turning to face her and gently taking her hand, "my father set me up to drive me away from you. He had people hit on me, and I was weak. I didn't fight for us." Clara didn't pull her hand away, and Richard felt it as a small sign of hope. "I could have resisted the seduction. I could have trusted in our love. I could have stood up to my father and fought for you, but I was a coward." Richard looked directly into her brown eyes. "I'm not excusing my guilt, Clara. My father's manipulations don't absolve me. But you were the only woman I ever truly loved. The only one who made me want to be a better person." They stood like that for a moment, hands intertwined, watching Emily try to reach an apple on a tree. "If you'll let me," Richard said, gently squeezing her hand, "we can try to be a real family. I don't want to live a life of appearances anymore. I want something real." Clara studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching for signs of sincerity. "Richard," she said, her voice firm but clearly emotional, "only time will tell. I'm not going to give my heart away again overnight. But if your actions are true, if you've really changed, maybe we can find a way." Before Richard could answer, Emily ran up to them, out of breath. "Daddy, come see. There's a treehouse, and I think I can climb up by myself." Richard looked at Clara, who nodded with a small smile. "I'm coming," he said, letting go of Clara's hand and running after his daughter. Clara stood on the porch, watching Richard try to climb the tree in his expensive suit, Emily laughing and giving him instructions on where to put his feet. For the first time in many years, she felt something she had deliberately buried: hope. It wasn't the perfect ending of a romantic movie. There were no dramatic declarations of eternal love, cinematic kisses, or emotional background music, but there was something more real, an authentic new beginning. A man finally taking responsibility for his actions. A woman who was cautious but willing to consider a second chance. A child finally having the present father she always wanted. As the sun began to set behind the trees in the yard, painting the sky in golden hues, Clara watched Richard pushing Emily on the swing, both of them laughing together. Maybe it wasn't the ending she had dreamed of 6 years ago, when she was young and naive, but maybe it was exactly the beginning they all needed now. A beginning full of real humanity, accepted responsibility, and true love. And for the first time in a long time, that felt not just sufficient, but perfect.